Hello, and welcome to the Whoever Podcast, a Christian podcast for non-Christians. I'm Andrew.
I'm Brian, and today we're coming back to you from Mark chapter 6. This time we're starting at verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." Then they said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Then they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. So that's our text. Andrew, what's our context?
Well, Jesus has started his ministry. He called his disciples. He spent time training them and preaching and teaching. And then he sent them out on this mission that they had, this short-term journey, to go in pairs to spread the word and to basically do what he had been doing and what he had been teaching them to do. And so the start of this passage is they've returned, and Jesus tries to have this kind of debrief and this time with his disciples, but the crowds are growing and coming and chasing him around to the point that he isn't actually able to do that, and so he ends up with this large crowd.
Yeah, so they try to run away or sail away.
Yeah.
"Come sail away with me." That's what Jesus said to the disciples.
He did.
And so they sailed away, and the crowd sees this, and so they kind of run around the other side of the lake, and they're there already. And so I like how it says in verse 33 here, it says that he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began to teach them. And this really is so characteristic of Jesus, that he sees people who are lost, who are looking for hope or purpose or meaning or looking for truth, and he has compassion on them. He teaches them. He had other things on his mind, like Andrew said. He probably wanted to get away for a little bit with his disciples and talk about what happened, but he sees these people and he's like, they need a shepherd. They need truth, and so he has compassion on them and he begins to teach them.
Yeah, so then as he's done this, he had intended to go to kind of a solitary place with his disciples, and it would seem that they brought supplies and things to stay there for a period of time. But all of the people who ran there to see Jesus and to follow him weren't prepared. And so the disciples' solution to it's getting later in the day and none of these people have eaten and there's a lot of them and there's no food was tell them to go. You tell these people they need to leave while there's still some daylight and go and find food. And Jesus says, "No, I want you to feed them."
Yeah, and this is a pretty big crowd. I mean, at the end of it says there are 5,000 men. Mm-hmm. So if you add in the women and potentially children, then you're looking at easily 10 to 15,000 people. That's a lot of people, and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And Jesus is like, "Hey, you should feed all these people." Mm-hmm. This is crazy. And the disciples, obviously, they're like, "Well, we can't do that." But Jesus does, and he feeds them. And this is really an astonishing miracle. In fact, in all 4 Gospels, this is the only miracle that is in all 4 of the Gospels except for the crucifixion. So there's only 2 miracles that are in all 4 Gospels, and one of them is the crucifixion, resurrection, and the other one is this, because it was that important to Jesus' ministry, and it was that big of a deal. Really, what Jesus is doing is not only is he showing his power, not only is he showing compassion, but by breaking bread and giving it to the people, he's reminding them that he is the one who they've been waiting for. He is the one who takes care of them. You know, a lot of these were Jewish people who they had heard the stories of how God provided bread for them in the desert while they wandered in the wilderness generations ago. And so here Jesus is giving them bread. He's saying, this is me, God, giving you bread. I am nourishing you. You're no longer sheep without a shepherd. I am shepherding you. I'm taking care of you.
Yeah, throughout the Bible, this theme runs that when God gives someone a task, the task isn't impossible. It seems impossible to us. He says to the disciples, well, why don't you feed them? There's 10,000 people out in the wilderness. Just give them food. And they're like, well, that's not doable, and it would be expensive. And Lord, do we have enough money? Do you want us to go into town and spend, half a year's wages trying to buy food for 10,000 people? That would be hard today to go and do, the amount of time and effort it would take to set that up. And so Jesus says, no, this is what, teaching these people, this is why we're here, and now I want to feed them. And so God gives this impossible task, but he also provides a way to do it.
Yeah.
And that runs through all of Scripture, this idea. And if you talk with Christians, it's true today. It's happened to me. It's happened to people that I know where this can't be done. There isn't funding. There isn't time. There isn't the ability to do this, but we still know we're supposed to. And then in supernatural ways, these things do work out if you're following God.
Absolutely. The disciples, they say that they find these 5 loaves and 2 fish. Mm-hmm. And so that, they can't go buy food. So they're like, well, this is what we have. And so Jesus takes it, and that's what he uses to feed these people. And there's a huge lesson in this for us, that God takes what we have and he makes it enough. Mm-hmm. No matter what it is that God calls us to do, we don't have what it takes. Let's just be honest about that. We don't have what it takes to do what God calls us to do. But we have a little bit. And God takes that little bit and then he makes it enough. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're not worthy of helping God, you're not worthy of serving the kingdom, if you feel like you have nothing to offer, I want to encourage you that you do have something. Offer that, and God will make it enough. He will grow that, and he will work with what you have to make it enough for his purposes.
Yeah, I mean, it just, as I read this, it comes to mind, the disciples are like, well, we have a very small amount of bread and a very small amount of fish, and it will go, we could feed the first couple people in line of this 10,000. What are we supposed to do? And Jesus says, well, then start with that. Do that, and then God does it. And at one point, I was working in northern Michigan, in the poorest county in Michigan. So we were busing kids in. I say busing, they were old vans. We were taking old vans and bringing kids in, and every week there were more. And soon there was 50, and now there was nearly 100 of these kids that were busing in, and we didn't have any money to do this. And we weren't, we were like, we have, our budget will pay for gas for a couple of weeks. How are we going to maintain this ministry? But we kept trying, and every time we looked in our bank account, and this is entirely true, it happened to me personally, there was just enough to pay the next bill. And that happened week after week, month after month for a year, to the point that when we looked at it and we realized we have spent a very large amount of money this year on this, we don't really know where that came from. Like, we can go and look, we know who gave the money, but we didn't expect these things to come in. We don't know how these people knew to donate, but it happened. And this is the type of thing that you will hear again and again from Christians. If you feel this is what God wants me to do, this is the good that I see that I could do, but I can only just do a little bit, go do that little bit. And God will help you to keep going. Yeah, and that's a scary thing to do. Mm-hmm. To start something and not really know how it's going to turn out. I mean, we do that with every single episode of this podcast, right? It's true. We don't script this. Yeah. That was actually how we started this podcast, though. Is we kept talking about it, and we're like, we just got to start doing it, and we'll see what God does. And that's what God calls us to do, though. Is you just start, and that's honestly the hardest thing when God calls us to do something is to just start, just do. Take that little bit that you do have and put it in there. But it really is amazing. I have stories too of how God has
has provided for us in supernatural ways, and how God has led us to do things that we never thought we could do on our own. But this is what God does for us. He is the shepherd. He is the sheep. Or he's the shepherd. We're the sheep. He is the shepherd who shepherds us and who leads us even when we feel inadequate. Yeah. I think that's maybe about it. I don't know.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. Jesus, because he had compassion on these people, because he cared, he decided that to meet their physical needs, and he does that in this supernatural way that also teaches us, hey, take the first step, do the little thing that God is calling us. And right earlier we read, whoever has little but is faithful with it will be given more. That's God's sort of mode of operation here.
Yeah, and I think maybe one more thing to add on to that too then is a lot of times we talk about what's going on in the world, and we lament and we cry and we complain about how bad our world is. And when I think about fixing the world, that seems like a huge problem that I can't do. But I could go just talk to one person and show them kindness and love. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but if you just start with just little steps, and God turns it into something really big. I think that's about it for today then.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or reach out to one of us. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Bye.